Hey guys, James here, and it is a beautiful day here in sunny California, but don't let that fool you. It is absolutely frigid. Today we are in my 2021 Mazda CX-30. This is the premium trim level, non-turbo, aka naturally aspirated. We've owned this car for about 22 months now, and we're up to about 22,600 miles. And in that time, we've really gotten to know this car, and I've come to really appreciate some of the little tiny details that Mazda absolutely nailed in the CX-30. So today, let's talk about those. Okay, so this first one sounds incredibly trivial. I know, I get it. But believe me when I say this, that this first one makes the CX-30 feel so much more premium than its competitors from, say, Honda or Toyota. And that is that the HVAC controls feel amazing under your fingers, and the responsiveness is just second to none. Mazda makes a big deal of the philosophy of Jinba ittai, right? The idea that the horse and the rider are one. And part of what that means is that every single input you put into the car is met with an immediate and predictable response. And of course, everybody knows that responsiveness can be found in things like handling, steering, throttle, brakes. But nobody thinks about the HVAC system, except Mazda. And so as weird as it seems, little details like the responsiveness of the HVAC system are actually critical to the way that you can feel in sync with the CX-30. Next up is the turn signals. Now, in the last 15 years or so, manufacturers of cars have been experimenting with more creative light designs. For example, a lot of Audis got those sequential turn signals that really emphasize which way you're signaling. And nearer and dearer to my own heart, Mustangs about in the last decade or so have had those tri-bar taillights that light up sequentially as well. So for the CX-30, Mazda thought, what can we do for the turn signals that would be kind of unique and kind of premium, because premium is sort of the name of the game at Mazda these days. What they came up with is turn signals that flash on immediately and then fade out. So it's on, fade out, on, fade out. The design philosophy of the CX-30, whether we're talking about the engineering design or the sort of aesthetic design, is it really emphasizes feeling and looking organic. And the turn signals are actually part of that organicness. Think about what happens when you throw a pebble into a pond of water that's very still. There's this immediate splash, and then the ripples fade out over time. And the same thing sort of happens when you clap your hands in an empty room or in like the Grand Canyon. There's the immediate sound, and then it sort of fades out. So on a very intuitive level, the turn signal behavior actually complements and is a part of the organicness of the CX-30 design. And this leads me into the next detail that I think Mazda absolutely nailed on the CX-30, and that is the S shape on the sides. Now, I previously posted an entire video on the incredible story behind this very seemingly simple design cue, so I'll link that down below. In this video, I'll just say that that is one of the design features that I think is so cool about the CX-30, and it's so distinctive. Now, this next one is a bit of a controversial one, so I understand if you don't agree with me, and that is a-okay, but hear me out. I think Mazda absolutely nailed the brake feel in the CX-30. The CX-30's brake pedal feels a little different from other cars' brake pedals in two different ways. The first is that you have to push a little harder on the CX-30 brake pedal than you would in other cars. Once you get used to it after like 2 days of driving this thing, then you realize it actually gives you a lot more control, and the brakes don't feel like they're over boosted and overly grabby. But the second difference is, in my opinion, the more interesting one. The first inch of pedal travel is actually very similar to any other car. It feels very normal. But after that initial inch, the pedal stops moving so much. It sort of firms up right there. And it becomes this very solid platform, essentially, for you to push your foot on. And the amount of force that you push the pedal with translates directly to how much braking force you get. But the pedal doesn't move very much after that first inch. And if you've ever driven like a proper racing go-kart or a really good sports car, you'll know that that kind of brake pedal behavior is what gives you really good response and really good feel at the end of the day. It's actually gotten really hot. You can see I'm sweating a little bit. Got time to turn on the AC, crank down that unbelievably responsive HVAC. So the last thing I want to talk about with you guys today is the suspension tuning. Now, when the Mazda 3 and CX-30 were coming out a few years ago, Mazda made a big deal about the way that they simplified the rear suspension, switching to a torsion beam, but they also tuned it better than the independent rear suspension of the previous generation Mazda 3. And what they really emphasized in their marketing materials at the time was that the suspension was tuned to move in a way that the human body can readily absorb and anticipate and counterbalance. Needless to say, I thought that that was a whole crockpot of marketing baloney. But then, over time, I realized they weren't lying. Over the summer, I drove my friend's Tesla Model Y for about 2 months, and that's when I discovered what it feels like to be in a vehicle that does not prioritize movements that the human body can absorb. One of the things that would always happen is that going over bumps, the headrest would always smack the back of my head at very inopportune times and with a disturbingly large amount of force. And that's when I realized, wait a second, the CX-30 virtually never does that. So if you have a CX-30, or if you have a chance to drive one in the near future, pay attention to the way it moves. It's not like a Rolls Royce in the sense that it's not just gonna float over all the bumps. The bumps will come through, the cabin will move. But the way it moves is actually very unusually tolerable. The car moves around you rather than shaking you along with it. And I'm not just saying all this because Mazda's like slipping me $100 bills under the table. Although, Mazda, if you're watching, call me. I'm saying this because it's my true experience. This is, like, at first I was like, it has to be marketing BS. But over time, as I paid attention to it, as I drove other cars that did not do this particular aspect of suspension tuning very well, I realized it's true. So what is the point of this whole video? Why are we here? The CX-30 is a vehicle that you know was crafted and designed with a ton of care. It's something that people's heart and soul went into, and that's what shows in the little details. It's these things that seem trivial on the surface, but when you look deeper, you're like, oh, I understand the significance of this. I understand why some team at Mazda spent so much time perfecting like the way the HVAC buttons click, the way it responds, the way the suspension is tuned, right? Like, you see why they did that and you're like, I got it, I understand. They wanted this whole product to just feel right. And that's why, personally, my wife and I have decided to buy this car after leasing it for 2 years. So our lease is up in February, and we're just gonna buy this thing outright because we think it's an awesome vehicle. So I hope y'all enjoyed this video where I basically nerded out on these like little details of the CX-30. I mean, truly, I appreciate them, so hopefully you guys did too. And if you did appreciate those details, well, hit that like button, because that's what's gonna tell the YouTube algorithm to send this out to other CX-30 fans, or even to, you know, HRV and Corolla Cross shoppers to convert a few over. So it really helps my channel and helps out Mazda too. And if you're not yet subscribed, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss anything that I have coming out. I am a big Mazda fan, so I often talk about Mazda. I also talk about other cars that really interest me, whatever they may be. Thanks for joining me today, guys. I gotta take this thing out to the car wash now because it's kind of gross. But yeah, have an awesome rest of your day. Take care, and I will see you next time.